Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a bilingual neurolinguistic programming and cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court-appointed and private, marriage counseling using the EFT method, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one session in both French or English, and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV Therapy and Coaching Services at 301-325-1550, and our website can be found at lifecoachdanamzalak.com. Today, I'm very excited to have for our 7th episode of season 16, a very special guest and New York Times best-selling author of Thunderdog, and also survivor of the terrorist attack of September 11, 2001, Mr. Michael Hingson. And just like every of my past episode, I will leave it up to the guests to properly introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Michael, the floor is yours.
Oh my gosh. Thank you very much, Dr. Dan. I really appreciate you having us on the podcast. I think you did a great job of providing a good introduction. I will just add a few things. I am blind. I have been blind my whole life. And so I was, needless to say, blind on September 11th. And the fact is that what I've learned is that let's take September 11th, for example, what happened on that day wasn't something that we had control over. I'm still not convinced we could have predicted it. I don't think we had enough information collectively to predict it. But whether we did or we didn't, and there was a breakdown in communications, what happened. And for most of us, we had no way of controlling that. What we always have control over, though, is how we deal with something that happens to us, whether it's positive or negative. We always have control over our minds and how we address and deal with issues. And so I've seen so many different kinds of reactions to September 11th. I've seen so many reactions on the part of people who are losing or who have lost their eyesight. And society teaches us that's a horrible thing. Well, it isn't certainly fun to lose your eyesight that you're used to, but it's not the end of the world, even though that's what people try to teach, is that if you go blind, it's the end of the world. It's not. We have control over how we deal with things. And it is something that I think all of us need to take more responsibility in dealing with and addressing.
Beautiful. Wow. Now, what was your experience during September 11th? Where were you when the airplane hit the tower? Was it in New York, or was it in DC, or where exactly were you?
I was hired to open an office for a Fortune 500 company in New York City, and we chose to open that office on the 78th floor of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center. That was in 2000, and the next year we had arranged to do some seminars to teach others how to sell our products. And we, of course, wouldn't you know it, chose September 11th. So I was in my office on the 78th floor when the aircraft struck the building. So we had a few guests. We got a colleague of mine, David Frank, got them out. And then David and I and my guide dog at the time, Roselle, went to the stairs and started down. And I want to make it really clear what a guide dog does and what a guide dog doesn't do. A guide dog doesn't lead a blind person. That's, again, going back to people's views of blindness. The job of the dog is to make sure that we walk safely. It's my job to know where to go and what to do. And I spent a lot of time learning all I could about the World Trade Center, where things were, how to get there, so I could direct my dog every step of the way. I learned what to do in the case of an emergency because I knew I wasn't going to be able to read signs when and if something ever happened, and it had happened before in the World Trade Center. So I needed to know, as the leader of an office, what to do, and learned all of that. What I didn't realize was that was helping me create a mindset that when something actually did happen, you know what to do. You don't need to worry about it unless the building's collapsing around you, which it wasn't at the time. And in fact, the other part about my story is that what I observed after the plane hit the building, while my colleague David was yelling, "Mike, there's fire and smoke above us. We got to get out of here right now." I was observing my guide dog, who was sitting next to me, wagging her tail and yawning, and go, "Who woke me up?" Not exhibiting any fear at all, knowing after working with guide dogs since 1964, so that's 37 years working with guide dogs, that in reality, um, the dog not exhibiting any kind of fear told me that her senses, as heightened as they are because she's a dog, wasn't detecting anything that would cause her to be anxious or worry. And I knew what she was like when she was afraid because she was afraid of thunderstorms.
Mhm.
Nothing bothered her on September 11th, which told me whatever was occurring wasn't such an imminent threat that we couldn't try to evacuate in an orderly way. And we did. And we made it down the stairs and to get out of the building because of that, and helped other people stay calm as we went down the stairs.
But I mean, when the plane hit the tower, was it the first or second tower?
First tower hit.
The
So
first.
we were on the 78th floor and it hit about the 96th floor, between 93 and 99. So 18 floors above us on the other side of the building. And people always say, well, of course, you didn't know what happened because you couldn't see it. Well, excuse me, I didn't know that anyone could see through 18 floors of concrete and steel. The reality is none of us on our side of the building knew what happened. And going down the stairs, we learned that. No one knew. We figured out an airplane hit the building because we did start to smell the fumes from burning jet fuel. But the bottom line is that we had no clue that an airplane had been crashed into the building by terrorists deliberately or anything like that, and didn't know that until after both towers had collapsed. And I spoke with my wife, who told me, and she was the first to tell me, that 2 hijacked aircraft had been crashed into the towers, one into the Pentagon, and a fourth was still missing over Pennsylvania.
So, I mean, but obviously the impact of a Boeing, I think it was a 737 that hit the tower. I mean, the tower must have shaken during the impact.
What you need to know about buildings like the World Trade Center and other tall buildings is, imagine them as a big spring.
Mhm.
So if you take a spring and you hold the bottom of it on a table and then push the top of it, that's what the building did. The airplane literally pushed the building over. The expansion joints that are built into the building to make it be able to sway in windstorms and so on, and in fact to be hit by airplanes, they expanded. So the building tipped and then it came back just like a spring would do.
Okay.
The only difference is that in this case, it wasn't just the plane hitting the building. If it had just been the plane, the building wouldn't have collapsed. But it had something close to 26,000 pounds of jet fuel that exploded and destroyed a lot more of the infrastructure of the building.
I see. Now, when you guys had to, go down the stairs and evacuate the building, now obviously a lot of people were in panic, but they didn't really know what kind of airplane hit, if it was a terrorist attack. At this point, no one knew anything. They just knew that there was something that hit the towers. So
Well,
how?
we figured out something hit the tower, but we didn't know that at first either.
Yes. So, how long or how long did it take for the building, especially the Tower One, to be able to evacuate from right below where the airplane hit?
The plane hit at about 8:45, 8:46, and we were outside of the building by 9:45. So it took an hour to go down the stairs. Again, we got some guests out first, so we were at the stairs at about 8:50,
Okay.
and then got to the 30th floor by 9:10, met firefighters and so on coming up the stairs. That slowed us down because they took up half the stairs, and also because at the bottom there was only one door, so there was a lot of traffic at the bottom. And so the bottom line is that by the time we actually got to the bottom and out into the lobby, it was about 9:35, because I remember checking my watch, and by the time we got through and to the outside, it was about 9:45, so about an hour from the time the plane hit.
And then by the time that you guys got at the base of the building, then the other tower got hit.
Well, no, the other tower was hit at about 9:04, 9:05. So we were in the stairs and had no idea that anything happened in Tower 2. The first clue we had was that we got outside and my colleague David saw fire in Tower 2, and we had no idea where it came from.
Okay. So then what was at the end, by the time that you got down at the first level, how were you directed to go to a safety? I mean, were you, because obviously there were like thousands of people just evacuating the buildings and all.
And that's all we were told to do, was to leave the building. A gentleman from the FBI escorted us like other people were being escorted. We were not allowed to go outside where we were in Tower 1. Of course, later we learned that that's because above us people were jumping. They took us to exits at the far end of the complex, as far away from the towers as we could be. Again, nobody was telling anyone what happened. So we finally got outside into the plaza at the second level. We went up an escalator and outside right by the Borders books, if anybody looks up old diagrams of the World Trade Center, and that's where we went out. We were as far away from the towers as we could be.
So when after this experience, have you dealt with post-traumatic experience of anything, Michael? Or because you were not able to see what was going on, it didn't really affect you the same way as it did?
Eyesight has absolutely nothing to do with it, which is what I go back to the beginning of what I said. We all have control over how we deal with things, although we may not have control over them happening. For me, I'm sure there has been some post-traumatic stress, but one of the things that happened after September 11th is that I contacted the school where I've gotten all of my guide dogs, and they wanted to put out a little story about our situation, which they did. And then I started getting calls, and they started getting calls that they transferred to me from the media, who wanted to hear my story. So if you put it in modern terms, our story went viral. And so the media started calling and saying, we want to interview you. And I talked with my wife, and we decided that if it would help people move on from September 11th, if we could educate people about blindness a little bit, and if we could teach them about guide dogs and just help in general, then it was worth doing. So the media and me talking about September 11th really is what made a big difference for me, because like in any situation where you deal with something, the best thing is to talk about it. Yes. So I subjected myself, if you will, to questions, very intelligent questions, very dumb questions, and so on. The other thing, though, that happened was that a lot of people started calling organizations and companies and so on, saying, we would like you to come and tell your story and tell us what we should learn, lessons about September 11th. And what eventually happened is I decided to make that a speaking career. So since September 11th, I left the computer industry and became a keynote speaker, because I decided that selling philosophy and selling life is a whole lot more fun, a whole lot more rewarding and relevant, yes, for me than selling computer products. And I still travel and speak today.
Wow. And when it comes to your experience overall, like in terms of writing into a book, because Thunder Dog is your journey with Roxy, you said the dog's name is
Roselle.
Roselle, okay. And
Roselle.
Is it practically just the experience of what happened during September 11th, or just everything about guide dogs?
It's about my life primarily. So the format of the book is every chapter starts with something that happened that day, chronologically going from the beginning to the end. And then we transition back to things in my life that I lived that taught me lessons that helped in dealing with whatever was going on at that time in the World Trade Center. And then we come back at the end of the chapter to ending or just dealing with one part of the complex and the World Trade Center, and then we go on to the next chapter. So it talks about guide dogs, it talks about blindness, it talks about me, and it talks about what happened in the World Trade Center. And the whole message of the book is blindness isn't the problem. Societal attitudes are the big problem. The unemployment rate among blind people who are employable is like over 65%. It's not because we can't work, it's because people think we can't work. They have a completely, totally wrong view of what blindness is and what it isn't. and it's also hopefully a book that helps people understand more of what guide dogs do, which is what I described earlier. Their job isn't to lead or know what I want. They're not telepathic any more than I am, or maybe they are, for all I know. But the bottom line is that the job of a dog is to guide and make sure that we walk safely. It's my job to know where to go and how to get there. How do I do that? Well, you know, I could ask how you see signs. I have no idea what it's like to see a sign, just like you would have no idea of some of the skills that I use to get that same information. But we both get the same information to accomplish tasks.
So when it comes to this sixth sense that you may have, Michael, what exactly do you feel that yours is enhanced compared to those who can see?
No, absolutely not. eyesight, again, has nothing to do with it. People think that. If it is there, it's because I use it. Any of my senses, if they're there and they work well and I hear things or whatever that other people don't, it's because I use my sense. Eyesight doesn't, or lack of eyesight doesn't make a person different. All it does is it causes you to more, hopefully, effectively and better utilize the senses that you have.
Okay. And so how long after did you take before you start writing your book, Thunderdog? Did you wait a few years? Did you write it right after everything kind of subsided with September 11th attack? When exactly did you decide to be able to sit down and write?
I never thought of writing a book, but in 2002, Roselle was awarded at the Canine Eukanuba Dog Show Championship in December of 2002, the award from the American Kennel Club for canine excellence because of what she did on September 11th. And while there, I met a gentleman named George Berger, who was at that time the publisher of the American Kennel Club Gazette, the AKC Gazette. He said, "You really ought to write a book." So I started making notes, and he and I talked about it a lot, and I ended up with over a megabyte of notes in my computer, but it just didn't really come together. But then in 2010, a woman named Susie Flory contacted me because she was writing a book and she wanted to include Roselle's story. It was a book called Dog Tales, 17 stories of dogs and things that they have done. So I told her my story and she said, you should write your own book and I want to help. And so I worked with Susie, and finally Thunderdog was published and officially released on August 2nd, 2011. And that first week out, it was a bestseller.
Wow. So it took you like 9 years complete from 2002 to 2011 to be able to get it published?
Well, it was mostly doing the writing of it. Susie's agent, who became my agent, Chip McGregor, when we told him about it, he said, "I don't want a 9/11 book." And I said, "Good, I don't want a 9/11 book. I want a book about life and so on." We wrote a proposal. We sent it to him. He loved it. He sold the contract to Thomas Nelson Publishing within a week in 2010. And then we started working on finishing the manuscript and so on.
So the editing, I mean, obviously it must have been like more of a challenge to be able to kind of get your ideas together, because what you said that something about how you structure the book in a different way. So what made you think to write this book that way and structure it in different chapters the way you did?
That actually happened early on in my notes. So that was something I wanted to do almost right from the beginning. It's just kind of the idea that came to me that I should do. And then we kind of finalized and perfected everything when Susie and I started working together on it. It was a collaborative event and an adventure where we both did various parts of it to make the book the success that it became and is. And it is still available wherever people can go buy books, and it's available on Audible, and it's available in print anywhere and so on as well.
And are you thinking about writing other books at this moment, Michael? You still focus primarily on your speaking engagements?
Both. So in 2013, we wrote another book called Running with Roselle. I worked with a woman who is involved in writing children's books, Jeanette Hanscom, and we wrote a book for youth about my growing up as a blind person and Roselle growing up, how we met, a little bit about the World Trade Center, but it's mainly about us. And then when the pandemic hit, I realized that although I've talked a lot about not being afraid on September 11th, I haven't really worked to teach other people how to do it. So I began writing a book, and that book also now is being edited. We're working with a publisher to do that, and it will come out sometime next year. So we'll have a title in a little bit for it. We originally were going to call it A Guide Dog's Guide to Being Brave, but I think we're going to call it something like Walk by Courage or Walk with Courage, and then there'll be a subtitle. But when that's all settled, then we can start to really talk about it a lot.
Now, what type of dog is Roselle?
Roselle was a yellow Labrador retriever.
Oh, okay. And when it comes to now, are you still like traveling a lot for speaking engagement, especially during the pandemic that must have slowed down dramatically? So how did you compensate, or how did you try to find alternative ways to be able to still get your message out there?
I started to learn about podcasting, and then I was hired by Accessible, which is a company in Israel that works to build products to help make websites more accessible for persons with disabilities. And I mentioned that I was learning about podcasting, and they said one of the things they would love me to do would be to start a podcast. And so we did last year. We started an Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. This past Friday, we published episode 144. We do
Wow.
2 episodes a week,
Okay.
and it's available wherever people can get podcasts. And always looking for good guests on podcasts on Unstoppable Mindset.
Beautiful. So, the unstoppable mindset, is it like more of describing you? So you're inviting people in the podcast that have gone through a very traumatic experience like yours and have gone or have found ways to be able to overcome those challenges, or what type of guests are you seeking on this unstoppable mindset?
We seek anyone who has a story to tell. So some of them have been exactly what you said. We've had others where people have just talked about other life journeys they've had. And there've just been an incredible number of different kinds of guests. We had one gentleman who, when he and his wife turned 40, he said to her, well, what do you want to do with the rest of our lives? He worked for the government. And she said, I want to adopt a daughter from China. And he had no clue about that. And he said, why? And she said, well, when I was a little girl, I read about something called the Weeping Cliffs, which was a place where they would take young girls because there were too many girls in China, and they literally threw them over cliffs. And she said, I want to adopt a child and save them from that. They went through the process of adopting a